On the morning of October the 25th, 1415, King Henry V of England and his army prepare for battle on the fields of Agincourt. Though outnumbered by the French, the English army was confident in their king's leadership and abilities. Henry ordered his men to prepare for battle, and the English army took up their positions, readying their weapons. The English longbowmen remained focused and composed as the French cavalry charged towards them. The tension in the air only grew stronger as the sound of the horses' hooves grew louder. Finally, the longbowmen drew back their bows, their eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. During the early 15th century, England was embroiled in a turbulent period of conflict and political instability. The 100 Years' War had been raging for decades, with England and France locked in an unending cycle of warfare. In the midst of this chaos, the Lancastrian faction seized the throne, only to be met with a series of rebellions that threatened to tear the country apart. It took several brutal campaigns by Henry IV and his son to quash these uprisings and maintain their grip on power. Finally, when Henry IV breathed his last on March 20th, 1413, the mantle of the English throne passed on to his successor, Henry V, who was crowned on April 9, 1413, amidst the fierce snowstorm that raged through the day of the coronation at Westminster Abbey. Despite the ominous weather, the common folk were torn between seeing it as a favorable sign or a harbinger of ill fortune. As the son of a usurper, Henry's position as ruler was far from secure in the early years of his reign, and many nobles viewed him with suspicion. Conspiracies soon arose against him, but he proved himself to be a shrewd and capable leader, determined to consolidate his power and maintain stability in his realm. As a result, Henry surrounded himself with loyal and trustworthy advisors and took a personal interest in ensuring that justice was done and lawlessness was eradicated. Despite these challenges, Henry V was driven by a burning desire to reclaim the territories and rights of the English royal family in France. He knew the truce between England and France was unlikely to hold for long, and he eagerly sought opportunities to advance his ambitious plans across the Channel. Meanwhile, France was beset by its political crisis, as King Charles VI's insanity left the kingdom vulnerable to power struggles among the nobility. Henry saw his chance to press his claims against this fraught and unstable environment. In the latter part of 1414, a grand diplomatic mission was dispatched to Paris to discuss prospects for peace. However, the demands made by Henry V were considered outrageous by most. He wanted the terms of the Treaty of Brittany of 1316 to be fully reinstated and for England to recover all the territories it had lost in Aquitaine, Poitou, and Ponthieu, as well as a series of other demands. It is possible that Henry was trying to regain English lands lost to France, but such preposterous demands may have been designed to ensure rejection. The King of England was convinced that his claims were valid and just, and he was prepared to use force to take what he believed was rightfully his if negotiations failed. Indeed, the preparation for war began well before discussions with King Charles broke down in June 1415. Orders were issued to raise the largest English army since the Battle of Crécy. Other feudal lords were called upon to supply troops from their fiefs, and Henry himself recruited warriors from his royal lands. The assembled force at Southampton was around 12,000 strong, including a large contingent of archers. Unsurprisingly, King Charles's government refused to concede to such astronomical demands, making war all but inevitable. After dealing with a plot to overthrow him and executing the ringleaders, Henry V and his invasion force set sail from England on August 11, 1415, in approximately 700 ships. Their first objective was to capture Harfleur, a fortified port that had long been a source of trouble for England due to its location. Taking it would reduce the threat to English ports and provide a critical base of operations in France. On August 14th, King Henry's armies landed near the mouth of the River Seine, ready to begin their campaign. Losing no time, Henry led his troops to lay siege to the city after his initial surrender demands were met with defiance. Despite the garrison being small, the resistance put up by the defenders proved surprisingly tenacious, and the siege dragged on for 6 weeks. During this time, the English forces were decimated by frequent outbreaks of dysentery, which ultimately claimed the lives of almost a third of the troops while leaving many others incapacitated. Finally, on September the 22nd, Henry and his men successfully took the city, leaving them to ponder their next move. However, there was little time to rest, as the French army was gathering in Rouen, posing a severe threat to the English. With the campaign in season closing, Henry knew he had to act quickly but faced a difficult decision. He couldn't risk marching to Paris as the army was too depleted, and such a move could provoke the French factions to reunite. At the same time, he couldn't just sail back to England without achieving any more. The solution was to head towards the coast, and the king wasted no time leading his forces out of Harfleur to mount a swift march to Calais. Contrary to the urges of his advisors, King Henry wanted to demonstrate his strength by pillaging northern France, as he believed the lands belonged to him. However, the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, quickly caught up with Henry and urged local nobles to mobilize their retinues and contain the invaders west of the Somme, intended to trap and crush them. After a few days of marching, the English reached the river, only to find the French blocking their path. Henry's plan for a swift campaign began to unravel when the French army gathering and closing in. The king was forced to lead his troops southwards to avoid being surrounded. However, the French had already placed their forces strategically. Charles d'Albret advanced with the main body, ready to intercept the English. But, in a surprising turn of events, Henry moved away from the river, heading southeast, which bewildered the French army. Finally, after more than a week of marching, scouts found an unguarded ford, which allowed the English to cross the Somme and move around the French position. Instead of marching along the coast, Henry's campaign turned into a grueling trek across France, taking its toll on his exhausted troops. Hoping to evade the enemy, the king was caught off guard when French heralds delivered a letter from Charles announcing his intention to engage in battle, thus blocking his way to Calais. Ignoring the French threats, the English king marched his army northwest towards Calais, only to be informed by his scouts that the Constable of France had successfully overtaken them and was blocking their path near a place called Agincourt. Henry was now cut off. Both armies settled in for the night, with the English army exhausted, hungry and sick, while the French were confident of their imminent victory. As night fell, King Henry enforced strict discipline among his exhausted and ill soldiers, commanding silence in the camp to ensure they remained alert for any surprise French attack. The miserable weather conditions of heavy rain and cold only added to the men's discomfort. Yet, the king continued to tour the camp, offering encouragement and boosting morale for the impending battle. The following morning, as the first light broke, the French army began to deploy, but simultaneously, the English soldiers had already positioned themselves on the field, signaling their willingness to give battle to the enemy. King Henry formed a defensive line, positioning his dismounted men-at-arms at the center with small groups of archers between each division. On either side, two large formations of longbowmen were placed in a concave shape. The archers fixed sharp stakes in front of them, strategically placed to impede the French cavalry. In response, Charles and his army formed two lines of several thousand infantry men and dismounted men-at-arms, with archers and crossbowmen interspersed between the divisions. Cavalry units were positioned on the flanks, while the third line consisted mainly of mounted men-at-arms. The exact number of troops from each side is still debated today. Accounting for losses from Harfleur, Henry was left with roughly 6,000 soldiers for the campaign, including about 1,000 men-at-arms and 5,000 archers. The English army faced a formidable challenge as they stood on the opposite end of the battlefield, peering across the vast sea of French soldiers that seemed to stretch on endlessly before them. The sheer number of their adversaries was impressive for the time, with some estimates putting the French troops at anywhere from 12,000 to 15,000 strong. The English were outnumbered nearly 3-1. The empire stretched for many hours, with D'Albret in no rush and Henry vastly outnumbered. Both sides refused to budge, but the English suffered from a lack of supplies while the French were well fed and comfortable. Elderly nobles suggested waiting out the English until they were too weak to fight. As the day wore on, Henry knew he had to take action before his exhausted men succumbed to sickness and hunger. The army went silent for a few minutes until the king shouted the long-awaited order: "Banners! Advance! In the name of Jesus and St. George!" The army knelt to pray and kissed the earth, then rose and trudged across the sodden field. Drums pounded, and the battle cry of "St. George! St. George!" filled the air. The French divisions were caught off guard by the English advance and scrambled to reorganize themselves. Just as it appeared that the two armies would collide, Henry abruptly ordered his men to halt at the outer limit of the longbow range. The archers then began to swiftly reposition the sharp wooden stakes in front of their line. After finishing, they retreated behind the protective fence and unleashed a barrage of arrows into the massed ranks of the French. In response, D'Albret commanded his troops to make their confessions, charge at the English, and fight honorably. The French army dispatched mounted knights on both flanks to ride ahead of the main line, intending to break through the English archers and pave the way for the heavily armored men-at-arms on foot. However, the muddy and ploughed field impeded their progress, and they soon found themselves riding into a fierce barrage of arrows. The relentless arrows caused havoc among the French knights, striking many down and causing their horses to panic and run back to the safety of the French lines. The fleeing horses collided with the oncoming infantry and broke their formation, scattering the men-at-arms and causing chaos. As a result of the failed cavalry charge, the 1st French Division was forced to slog through the mud under constant fire from the English longbowmen. Some of the more inexperienced French nobles believed that the sheer number of knights and men-at-arms would be enough to intimidate the English soldiers, but they were mistaken. The French men-at-arms adhered to the code of chivalry, insisting on facing their English counterparts in one-on-one combat, ignoring the longbowmen on the flanks. By the time the French reached the English line, they were exhausted, and many were wounded by arrows. Despite their weariness, the French were able to push the English back with their sheer numbers, but the densely packed formation made it difficult for them to wield their weapons effectively. Many could not lift their arms, and the visors of their helmets limited their visibility, resulting in a flailing mass of armored limbs and weapons. The pressure from the rear of the 1st French Division forced those in the front off their feet, and many were trampled into the mud by their comrades, unable to rise again. The dead and wounded piled up, creating a gruesome obstacle that only made matters worse for the French. The arrival of the 2nd French Division only added to the confusion, as their attempts to press forward from the back of the 1st Division only served to slow them down and create more chaos in the ranks. Despite their initial success, the French could not capitalize on it, and the battle turned into a bloody and brutal struggle. As the English line grew weaker, the archers abandoned their bows and charged forward into the brutal close combat, wielding their swords and daggers. Their lighter armor gave them the agility to move effortlessly through the mud, slicing through the French formation. With no reserves to spare, King Henry himself fought alongside his troops, capturing many French soldiers to be held for ransom after the battle. After 2 hours of intense fighting, the victory was won. The surviving French soldiers retreated in confusion towards the undecided 3rd Division. Meanwhile, a local French lord led a group of knights and peasants towards the English camp, where they managed to capture the king's extra crown. Fearing the possibility of being trapped between two enemy forces, Henry ordered the prisoners to be executed to prevent any chance of a third French attack. He then sent a messenger to the French 3rd Division demanding their withdrawal from the battlefield. The remaining French withdrew, leaving behind a scene of carnage. Casualties on the English side were minimal, around 600. But on the French side, the losses were catastrophic, exceeding 5,000 men. Henry V's victory at Agincourt propelled him to new heights of power as he expanded his territory and cemented his status as a significant military leader. However, his crowning achievement came in 1420, when he negotiated the Treaty of Troyes, which recognized him as regent and heir apparent to the French throne. Henry's reign was characterized by his military prowess and attempts to bolster English culture and governance. He established a strong central government and worked to promote the use of English in official documents and communication. Though his reign was cut short by his untimely death at the young age of 36, Henry's legacy as a warrior king and defender of English culture endures. The Battle of Agincourt remains a powerful symbol of military strength and determination, a testament to the bravery and resilience of the soldiers who fought in the battle, echoing through the centuries.